Story number 1. The Clock Tower's Secret. The clock tower at Black Ridge University was the tallest structure in the city. Its chimes echoed through the campus every hour, marking time with precision. Students admired its beauty during the day, but at night, they avoided it like a cursed relic. The legend went like this. In 1897, when the tower was first built, a maintenance worker named Elias Carter went missing while repairing the clock's gears. His body was never found, but strange things began happening soon after. The clock would stop at exactly 3:15 a.m. for no reason, and anyone inside the tower during that time would disappear. By the 1970s, the university banned entry after dark. But rules are meant to be broken, and in 2024, 3 students decided to test the legend. Cameron, Layla, and Jude were thrill seekers. They'd spent the semester debunking campus myths. From haunted dorms to cursed lecture halls, the clock tower was their ultimate challenge. On a chilly Friday night, they sneaked into the tower with flashlights and a camera to document everything. "This is going to make an epic vlog," Cameron said, climbing the spiral staircase that wound around the tower's interior. Layla rolled her eyes. "Let's just get the footage and leave, okay? This place gives me the creeps." Jude laughed. "Relax, it's just an old clock. No ghosts here." But as they ascended, the air grew colder and the sound of ticking grew louder. The first oddity they noticed was the graffiti on the walls. "Help me," one scrawl read, the letters jagged and uneven. "I was here. He's watching," said another. "Probably just some pranksters," Cameron muttered, though his voice wavered. At the top of the stairs, they reached the clock's machinery room. Massive gears turned with mechanical precision, their rhythmic grinding filling the air. The room was dimly lit by the moonlight streaming through the clock's glass face. "Okay, let's split up," Cameron said. "I'll get footage of the gears. Layla, check the clock face. Jude, see if there's anything behind those panels." "Split up. Have you seen a horror movie?" Layla snapped. "Fine, stick together, whatever." As they explored, the clock struck 3 a.m. The sound reverberated through the room, louder than it should have been, making them all jump. Then the ticking stopped. The silence was deafening. "Is it broken?" Jude asked, stepping closer to the gears. The machinery groaned, and the gears ground to a halt. "Guys, look," Layla whispered, pointing at the clock face. Through the translucent glass, a shadow moved, a tall, thin figure pacing back and forth. "Is someone out there?" Cameron asked, moving closer. "No one could be," Layla said. "We're 200 feet off the ground." The figure stopped pacing and turned, as if it could see them through the glass. Then it vanished. The temperature in the room plummeted, their breath visible in the icy air. The ticking resumed, faster now, almost frantic. "We need to leave," Layla said, her voice shaking, but the staircase was gone. "What the hell?" Jude shouted, spinning around. The entrance they had come through was now a solid wall. The gears began to move again, grinding louder and louder until they screamed, metal against metal. "Who's there?" Cameron called, his flashlight flickering. The shadow returned, but this time it was inside the room. The figure was tall and skeletal, its face obscured by darkness. It moved unnaturally, its joints bending at impossible angles. "Leave," it hissed, though its mouth didn't move. "We're trying," Layla screamed. The figure raised a bony hand, and the gears stopped abruptly, plunging the room into silence. The clock face cracked, splintering like a spiderweb. Wind howled through the room, and the figure lunged toward them. Cameron dropped the camera and ran toward the wall where the staircase had been. He pounded on it, screaming for help. The clock struck 3:15. When the police arrived the next morning, they found the tower empty. The camera lay on the floor, its battery dead, but the memory card was intact. The footage showed the 3 students entering the room, exploring, and then nothing. At exactly 3:15 a.m., the video cut to static. The clock tower was sealed off permanently that day. But rumors persisted. Some say if you stand outside the tower at 3:15 a.m., you can hear the faint sound of gears grinding and voices crying out for help. And sometimes, if the moonlight hits the clock face just right, you might see 3 shadows trapped inside, endlessly pacing. Story number 2. The Playground at Midnight. In the small, sleepy town of Willow Creek, there was an old playground everyone knew to avoid after dark. Rusted swings creaked in the wind. The merry-go-round spun on its own, and the slide, once painted bright blue, was now faded and streaked with strange black stains. The townsfolk whispered stories about the playground. A child had gone missing there decades ago, and ever since, strange things happened at midnight. No one dared to go near it, except for Alyssa, Danny, and Claire, three friends desperate to prove the legend wrong. "Come on," Danny said, hopping over the rusted gate. "It's just a playground. What's the worst that could happen?" Alyssa hesitated. "You've heard the stories. Kids say they've seen things." "Kids also believe in the tooth fairy," Danny scoffed. Claire, the quiet one of the group, glanced at her watch. "It's 11:55. Let's just get this over with." They wandered into the playground, flashlights in hand. The night was eerily quiet, the usual chirp of crickets absent. Alyssa shivered, pulling her jacket tighter. The swings moved slightly in the breeze, but as Danny walked past, they stopped. "This place is boring," Danny said, climbing onto the merry-go-round. He spun it lazily, the rusty metal groaning under his weight. Claire stayed by the slide, staring at the strange black streaks. They looked almost like handprints. Alyssa wandered to the jungle gym, her flashlight sweeping across the chipped paint and tangled vines. "It's just old and creepy," she muttered. The clock on Claire's phone struck midnight. The air grew colder, sharp enough to sting their lungs. The swings began to creak, even though there was no wind. "Danny, stop messing around," Claire said, her voice trembling. "I'm not doing anything," Danny replied, jumping off the merry-go-round. It was spinning faster now, the metal shrieking as it turned. Alyssa screamed. They turned to see her standing frozen near the jungle gym, her flashlight pointed at the ground. "What is it?" Danny asked, running over. Alyssa pointed, her hand shaking. In the dirt, fresh footprints led from the jungle gym to the slide. Small, barefoot prints, too small for any of them. "Okay, we're done here," Claire said, backing away. But as they turned to leave, the gate they'd entered through was gone. "What the?" Danny spun around, searching for another way out. The playground seemed bigger now, stretching into the darkness. The merry-go-round stopped spinning. The swings hung still. Then they heard it, the soft sound of laughter. It started as a giggle, high-pitched and playful, but it grew louder, echoing all around them. "Who's there?" Danny shouted, his voice cracking. A shadow darted past Alyssa, so fast she barely caught it in her flashlight beam. "Run!" Claire screamed, grabbing Alyssa's arm. They sprinted toward the slide, hoping to climb over the fence beyond it. But as they reached it, a figure appeared at the top. It was a child, no older than 6, with pale skin and hollow black eyes. "Stay," the child whispered, its voice like a breeze through dead leaves. Danny threw a rock at the slide, but the child vanished before it hit. The laughter returned, louder and closer now. The swings moved again, but this time they weren't empty. Figures sat on them, shadowy, indistinct, their faces blurred. They swayed back and forth, their laughter mingling with the child's. Alyssa tripped, falling hard to the ground. When Claire and Danny turned to help her, they saw the black-streaked slide up close. The stains weren't just marks, they were handprints. Hundreds of them pressed into the metal as if by invisible hands clawing to climb. "Go, go, go," Danny shouted, pulling Alyssa to her feet. They ran toward the jungle gym, but the air grew thick, slowing their movements. The laughter was deafening now, and the shadows moved closer, their blurry faces twisting and elongating. Claire looked back and froze. The child was there again, standing in the middle of the playground. This time it smiled. "We just wanted to play," it said. The ground beneath them shifted, turning soft like quicksand. Claire screamed as something grabbed her ankle and pulled her down. "Claire!" Alyssa cried, reaching for her, but the shadows swarmed. When the sun rose, the playground was empty again. Danny, Alyssa, and Claire were never seen again, but the black handprints on the slide seemed darker, fresher. And that night, the townsfolk swore they heard laughter echoing from the playground. Story number 3. The Locker Room Door. It was an ordinary Friday night at Ridgewood High. The basketball team had just wrapped up practice, and the players hurried out, eager to start their weekends. All except Ethan, the last one in the locker room, gathering his things at his usual far corner locker. The fluorescent lights above flickered as he tied his shoes. He glanced up at the clock, 9:13 p.m. The janitor would be locking up soon, and he didn't want to be stuck inside. But as Ethan reached for the door, it wouldn't budge. He frowned, pushing harder. The door had always been heavy, but now it felt like it was stuck or locked. "Hey, anyone out there?" he called, banging on the metal. His voice echoed back at him, the sound swallowed by the cavernous room. Ethan turned, his frustration mounting. He'd have to find another way out. The air felt colder suddenly, and the faint sound of dripping water reached his ears. Strange. There weren't any showers running, and the locker room had been dry when he entered. He turned a corner and stopped. One of the lockers far down the row was open. Ethan was sure it hadn't been open earlier. He stepped closer, his sneakers squeaking on the tiled floor. "Hello," he called. His voice cracked slightly, but he told himself it was just nerves. The locker door creaked open wider, revealing nothing but shadows inside. That's when he saw it. A wet footprint on the floor just outside the locker. Ethan's chest tightened. The footprint was small, like a child's, and the water glistened under the flickering light. "Who's messing with me?" he shouted, his voice shaking. The locker slammed shut. Ethan jumped, his heart pounding in his chest. He ran back to the main door and yanked at the handle, but it still wouldn't move. Behind him, the sound of more locker doors creaking open filled the room. One by one, the metal doors swung open slowly, the noise echoing like nails on a chalkboard. Ethan turned and saw rows of lockers yawning open, their dark interiors facing him like empty mouths. A low whisper filled the room. "Leave. You're not supposed to be here." Ethan backed away, his legs trembling. "I'm trying to leave," he shouted. The whispering grew louder, overlapping voices hissing incomprehensible words. The room felt colder, and Ethan's breath fogged the air. Then he saw it, a figure standing at the end of the row. It was a girl, her hair dripping wet, her clothes clinging to her frail body. Her head hung low, obscuring her face. Are you okay?" Ethan stammered. She didn't respond. Instead, she lifted her head slowly, revealing empty black eyes. Ethan bolted, running down the rows of lockers, his shoes slipping on the wet floor. The whispers followed him, louder now, the voices screaming his name. He rounded a corner and stopped. The girl was there again, blocking his path. "Why did you come back?" she whispered, tilting her head unnaturally. "I don't know what you mean," Ethan yelled, stepping back. "You didn't listen. They told you to stay away." The lights flickered violently, and when they steadied, Ethan was no longer in the locker room. He was underwater. Cold, murky water surrounded him, pressing in on his chest. He tried to scream, but his lungs filled with icy liquid. Shadows moved in the depths, circling him. Through the murk, he saw the girl again, her hair floating around her like seaweed. She reached for him, her fingers icy and sharp. Ethan's vision blurred as the whispers consumed him. The next morning, the janitor unlocked the locker room to find it pristine, just as he'd left it. But when the basketball team returned for practice that evening, they noticed something strange. Ethan's locker was wide open. Inside, dripping wet, was his jersey, neatly folded, and carved into the metal was a single word: drowned.